Now that Inside Out 2 has released, it's now time to rank all 28 Pixar movies. Now, just as a disclaimer, Pixar is one of my, if not my favorite studio of all time, so this list is incredibly hard to rank. Since Pixar has such amazing movies, even if a movie is really good, it is still extremely low on this list, and I wish it wasn't that low. So if something's low on here, that's the reason. Even though I do not want it that low, it just happens to be there because Pixar has just too good of films. So without further ado, let's begin. Lightyear is a bad, lazy way of telling this story. You could have told this movie in a million different ways, but you picked the laziest version to go about. It's so lazy by the time the actual plot gets into play that it's just almost unwatchable and extremely boring. I was just waiting for this movie to just end already. I just waited and waited for the credits to roll till finally it did, and I felt a cheer happen because it finally came up. This is the one Pixar movie on this entire list that I do not like, which is a disappointment that Pixar made this, because Pixar is my favorite movie studio, one of them at least. So the fact that they made a movie this bad pains me, but I do not like this movie. Every studio has to have that one movie, and Pixar has Lightyear. I used to think that Good Dinosaur was underrated, but now watching it, it's forgettable. This is a very forgettable Pixar movie. There's nothing special in here. It doesn't really have that Pixar spark that it normally does. The last 20 minutes of this movie, they just decided they forgot a villain in the movie, so they just threw Thunderclap in here and just put him in. And then basically throughout the entire story, it's just Arlo and Spot slowly working their way back home. I feel like that you could have added a better plot to it to make it more enjoyable throughout it. I mean, like, it still has those Pixar moments in there, but it's not really fully capture the magic of Pixar. Still good for it being as low as it is on this list. It's still a good movie. It's just forgettable and nothing special compared to what everything else Pixar has made. Finding Dory is a solid movie, but the only problem with this movie is that it took all the charm, everything that made Finding Nemo such a great movie, and just made this. It doesn't really have all the charm and everything that made Finding Nemo great. But it's just a normal adventure, doesn't really add anything new to the table, or doesn't take away anything new. We just get to see Dory's family and what Dory was like in her childhood. Now, in my opinion, since you made this movie, you kind of need to make a Finding Marlin movie to kind of complete the trilogy. But this one's just solid, doesn't really add anything new. This time around, I did like Elemental a lot more than I did the first time watching it. The first time watching it in theaters, I was quite bored. This time around, I was a bit more entertained. Now, yes, it's not like the best thing Pixar has made. It also runs into the same problem with it doesn't really appeal to everyone like like other Pixar movies have. The Pixar magic that they're supposed to have. But it still comes across as a fun movie. Pretty enjoyable, but there's kind of too much going on too. Like, we have all those different themes it's telling, and then all those different stories that it's telling as well. Like romance, then helping Amber with her dad. There's just too much going on with this movie in only an hour and a half. So, and then pacing is not the best, humor is not the best, but it's still pretty enjoyable. I know a lot of people aren't fans of Turning Red, but I do like Turning Red. Now, yes, the main message of the movie and the actual theme of the movie is not geared towards me, but I do see it as still a fun, enjoyable movie. Although it doesn't have that Pixar spark, that magic that Pixar movies usually have, it's not fully in this movie, but I still do enjoy it, because I just find it to be fun, still. I do think Brave is still a good movie, but it's not Pixar's best film. At certain moments, it doesn't really fully feel like a Pixar movie because this is the only princess movie that they have, and Disney is usually known for the princess brand, so that doesn't really match Pixar, but it still does have that Pixar message that every Pixar movie has. It still has all those themes and stuff that every Pixar movie would have, and that heartwarming stuff throughout it, but it doesn't really fully feel like a Pixar movie. But I still do like Brave. I have always liked Monster University, even though it fails to really capture the magic that the first movie had. The first movie that I love, it fails to capture the magic from that movie. But I still do think that this movie is a really good prequel to that movie. We're able to see the dynamic between Mike and Sully grow. We get to see where Mike and Randall started off at the beginning and see where they ended at the end. But the movie just doesn't have the same heartfelt messages that the first movie had, or the same humor, the same dynamic between the main two characters. It's all just gone and just doesn't really feel the same. But I still do enjoy this movie and think that a lot of people don't really give a lot of credit to it. Luca's a fun Pixar movie. That's all it is for me, because of the fact that from basically this point forward in Pixar, with a lot of these newer releases, with some exceptions here and there with like Lightyear and such, basically for like Turning Red and Elemental, they're basically targeting a certain demographic. So this movie doesn't reach my demographic. This movie doesn't connect with me the way Pixar movies are supposed to, because this movie doesn't have that wide appeal that would connect like every other Pixar movie does. Which is the same problem with Onward for some people. Not me, you'll find out later. For these Pixar movies, I still enjoy them, but they don't connect with me with that emotional level like they're supposed to. Soul is one of those Pixar movies where it takes a deep matter about the meaning of life and is able to make a really interesting story out of it. Who knew Pixar could make such a compelling story about the meaning of life? I really enjoyed what they did with this movie. Just when it comes to the theme, the characters, just certain ideas in here, I think they were able to capture it perfectly. It's just I wish it could be higher on this list, but there's a lot more Pixar movies that I prefer over Soul to watch. Like the subject matter compared to like every other Pixar movie, it may not be the funnest to watch, but the movie makes it fun. But there's a lot more Pixar movies that I would rather watch. Although I do remembering liking Inside Out a lot more, it still pains me to put it here on this list. This just shows how good Pixar movies are, that a movie this good is this low on this list. But Inside Out is a really fun, really emotional ride. There's no reason why this movie is as low as it is on this list. The only reason is that there's a ton of movies better than it that Pixar has made. But it really does pain me to put Inside Out as low on this list as it is. Because Inside Out introduces a new idea of these emotions controlling you. And like I said, it brings an emotional impact to all of that and stuff. It just pains me that it's so low on this list. This is another Pixar movie that pains me to put it as low as it is. Coco is another great Pixar movie. The songs in here, because we don't get a lot of Pixar movies that sing. Actually, we barely have any that sing. Coco is the one of the songs that relate to the story, which is what Pixar wanted, which is why most of their movies don't sing. But it works, and the songs are wonderful in here. They're so catchy, and they're just well-written songs. It's not a Pixar movie without being emotional too. This one has those emotional beats at the end of the movie about forgetting and memory. Just everything you would expect from a Pixar movie is delivered in Coco. I just wish it was a lot higher on this list. But like I said with the first Inside Out, there's a lot of better Pixar movies for these two having to be so low on this ranking. Inside Out 2 is better than the first movie. Not that the first movie is bad, but it sets just a great comeback for Pixar because the previous movies that they recently made were not best and didn't really connect with audiences. But Inside Out 2 definitely does. It had that emotional theme with a mature one as well. Just the new cast of characters was a great add to the movie. And just the overall movie was just really fun and really good. My only problem with this movie is that it was too short, and that's because I didn't want the movie to end. This movie is great and a great comeback for Pixar, and I can't wait for what they do next with this franchise. Now, I feel like I'm the only person on the planet that likes Cars 3 this much. I think of this movie as the last in the trilogy, and it does a really good job at closing off Lightning McQueen's storyline while also introducing a new storyline and shows Lightning McQueen going through this midlife crisis to eventually end off with basically his era of racing over. I found that to be a really satisfying ending to Lightning McQueen, and in the whole story throughout it, we basically see the growth of Cruz, and we slowly get to that payoff at the end of the movie. And this movie actually takes its time and goes back to the racing, the Hudson Hornet. And we actually get to see the racing again. Now, don't get me wrong, we're going to cover it shortly, but I like the spy story of Cars 2. But I can say that it goes away from the racing story. Cars 3 has that racing story. I just loved everything to do with this movie, and I really like this movie. And I feel like I like it too much because I'm the only person on the planet that really likes it. I still do not understand how people do not like Cars 2. It is such a good spy film. It has the really good suspense and a really good story and ends it all off with a big old plot twist that I wasn't even expecting. I don't understand how people don't like this movie. It gets to focus on Mater, and who does not like Mater? Mater is the fun comedic relief character. Why can't we not focus a movie on him? He is a really good comedic relief character. Now, I do understand some complaints how it's not about racing, but we still see Lightning McQueen in here racing, so it's not like the entire movie is a spy thriller. I just never understood how people didn't really like this movie. In looking at Letterboxd, it looks pretty mixed. Well, I know some people like it, some people don't. I don't remember liking A Bug's Life as much as I did, but I really liked it this time around. I found that Hopper is a really compelling villain. Just what they're able to do with him in just the beginning scene sets him up as a really good villain. And just that opening scene alone that we see with Hopper shows how compelling of a villain he is going to be and stays that way throughout the movie. Hopper's sidekick, his brother, I find him to be the comedic relief of the movie. I found him being funny the entire movie and just kind of going along with Hopper in a silly way. I also find that this movie sends a really good message to stand up, don't let anyone put you down, and kind of rise up to defend yourself. Don't forget that this movie started the short, long term of bloopers. The bloopers in here are not the best. There's better ones in Toy Story 2 and Monsters, Inc. But the bloopers in here were the start of something, but it soon ended. And I wish it continued on longer. This was a really great movie for Pixar to have after Toy Story. Another Pixar movie that I will never understand the hate for, Onward. How do you not like this movie? Now, I understand if you don't have a brother upon brother connection, that part's more understandable, but for me, this is an emotional Pixar movie. It hits all those right notes and is able to deliver on that message that makes it stand out. And when the moment delivers in the final act, it definitely delivers on that note and is able to make a big emotional beat that it needs to. And then just the whole storyline on magic too. We never really get a Pixar movie with magic like this, like we got in Brave and such, but this is a really fantasy kind of story, and I'm all in for that. I just don't understand how you do not like this movie. I will never understand, but I really enjoy this one. It's just where I place this on this list. I can't really find a better spot for it because all the ones above it I would rather watch, but then this movie's still really good, so I don't really want to put it as low as it is right now. This is why ranking Pixar movies are so hard, because you can't really find that perfect spot to place the movie. Cars is a really fun movie. The racing scenes at the beginning and end of the movie is probably the best part of the movie. They're able to have that dramatic thriller and suspense that you need, and they're able to build it up all perfectly, that when all these moments hit during those races, it pays off. And this one was also able to introduce the iconic Radiator Springs and all these characters in here. Owen Wilson is phenomenal as Lightning McQueen. He brings such heart to the character and his voice matches him perfectly. Speaking of Lightning McQueen, the story arc that Lightning McQueen goes on into this movie, from starting off as not the best character, but then ending off as a really likable character, I do really like. And then, of course, you have everyone at Radiator Springs, like Mater, Sally. This is actually the movie that we spend time the most in Radiator Springs, so I can appreciate it for that, because this is where we actually see all these characters where they're really meant to be. Cars is such a fun Pixar movie. Now, I do think Ratatouille is an extremely overrated Pixar movie, but it is still a 9 out of 10 movie. That just shows how good Pixar of a studio is. They make incredible movies, but I do think Ratatouille is overrated. A lot of people say that it's the best Pixar movie out there, but I don't see that. But I still do really like this movie. It has a sweet message, it has great characters, a great story, it has all the great things that a Pixar movie would have. Is that it's just overrated and I can never connect with it the way other people do and say it's the best Pixar movie. Because in my opinion, there's far better ones than this Pixar movie. But that's just my opinion. Now yes, Toy Story 4 is pointless. There is no reason why this movie needs to exist. But for me liking the franchise, I like being with these characters still. So I still do really like this movie. Now yes, the comedy's nowhere near as good. I don't really like the comedy in here. There's a bunch of dumb jokes. And then the gang's not together. That kind of ruins the movie for me too, because we're introduced these new characters that are nowhere near as interesting as if Woody and Buzz were with like Jesse, Bullseye, Slinky, Rex. They're all apart and it just doesn't have the same magic that made Toy Story 3 such a great movie. And then of course there's that ending where I'm one of those people that don't really like it. Now I'm curious to see how Toy Story 5 will handle it, but we'll wait and see for that. I still do like this movie, spending time in this world with these characters that I really like. The reason why I really like this franchise. And spending the time with these characters still make me love this movie. Because of these characters, these unique and wonderful characters that we all fell in love with, to still make a great movie. I don't understand the hate for Incredibles 2. This movie does not deserve anywhere near the hate it gets. Now yes, it is nowhere near as good as that original film. You can't really top that. But I do not understand the hate when it comes to the plot, the villain, what they do with the characters. It never deserves the hate for any of that. I find it to be a really interesting story on where they take the sequel. Now yes, the first one does do certain plot points better, but the second one still does a really good job at keeping it all unique. And I did really like what they did with like Dash and Violet in here, because we actually see more time with those characters, and I feel like they had a bigger role to play in here than they did in the first movie. I just like this movie. I don't really understand how people don't. What they were able to do with WALL-E shows how great of a studio Pixar is. They were able to take a story that has little to no words, because it's featuring robots. That shows how good Pixar is, because they made an incredible story, and most beautiful story with romance between these two characters, and this futuristic world showing the lesson of technology, how to treat your planet, multiple different lessons in here, and it was all captured with little to no words. That's incredible. WALL-E is another one of those classic movies. That's an incredible movie. Up is another really emotional Pixar movie. Those first 20 minutes alone makes it a really emotional movie. But then you have the story throughout it as well, with like this heartfelt story throughout it of just Carl trying to fulfill his promise to his wife and takes her to Paradise Falls. And of course, by the end of the movie, she wants him to take his own adventure as well, which is another emotional beat, but not as sad as those first 20 minutes. But just the whole story throughout, and Carl's character arc throughout it, is a really great story. The villain in here too, with his monologue talking about everyone he's killed, also really great. Just a fun, really good Pixar movie. And an emotional one too. Don't forget that the score in here is also phenomenal. I love that Merry Life, which is what the song's called. I love that song. And that song is basically the main theme throughout this entire movie. And I love it. Toy Story 2 is an amazing sequel to the first movie. Able to introduce new characters, Jessie, Bullseye, and we're able to instantly connect with these characters, especially Jessie when they're showing her flashback and they're playing the song When Somebody Loved Me. That entire scene right there, heartbreaking, and makes you instantly connect with Jessie. This movie did a really good job at making a sequel to the first movie, because at this time period, the sequels to movies were usually The Lion King 2, Aladdin 2, not the best sequels, and this sequel was able to be perfect. It was supposed to be straight to DVD though, but the plot points changed and stuff happened, made it a theater movie. Glad we got the version we got. Finding Nemo is able to execute an amazing story. The relationship between Marlin and Nemo at the beginning of the movie sets up their character arc, and then by the end of the movie, we have that perfect relationship between these two characters that just has that satisfying effect that you want a warm hug when the movie wraps up. And throughout the movie, as Marlin goes on to his adventures with Dory, there's those little details that show Marlin's character arc throughout it. For example, the scene where the jellyfish happened, Dory said, "Trust me," to go in between it, not over the tunnel, but Marlin didn't trust him. So then when she said, "Trust me," before she talked to the well, you can see Marlin look at her scar that she has after the jellyfish, and just shows his character arc of what he learned and everything. Just small details like that really add to the story and characters, and this one was able to do it. And speaking of Dory, Dory is the scene stealer. Every time she's on scene, well, most of the movie, but mostly she always has that funny line. Short-term memory loss always has that comedic timing that, you know, she forgot something, but that just makes it funnier because she already knows it. Finding Nemo is such a great film. The Incredibles is about a man having a midlife crisis, but with superheroes. And Pixar makes that story work with the deep, meaningful side of the story that it has. And it's just able to Pixar it and make it that feel to it. It just makes it that Pixar movie. Syndrome is an amazing villain. Just everything to do to set him up too with Incrediboy at the beginning of the movie, and then we really don't see him again until Syndrome. So just that little detail that we remember him, but he's not important until the big reveal, which is what made it execute really well. And just the scene where we see Mr. Incredible looking at the wall on Syndrome's computer, seeing like all the heroes that were killed off by him just for him to be a superhero, works really well because of all the dramatic behind it. And we don't really need to see Syndrome do any of that. Just having it said and seen with all the dramatic music and everything that was built up makes Syndrome a great villain. This is such a great superhero movie and Pixar movie with a lot more meaning behind it than just being a superhero movie. Toy Story 3 is a masterpiece. The story and theme being told It's really good. Learning to let go is the theme. It's told really well because it's told through the toys, and they also aged up Andy with the audience to make the theme really work. As in the story, I love Prison Break stories, so this is another one that really works on that level. And this is the only Toy Story movie where we actually see the gang together. Because the first one is basically just Woody and Buzz together. The second one is basically Woody, Jesse, Bullseye, and like Buzz and that gang's doing their own thing, going to Woody. So this is the actual one that we actually see the gang together. And I just love their interaction together. Because that's what makes this movie special. Because we actually see the entire gang together. And this movie is also extremely emotional. It makes you sob twice. This is the real send-off to the Toy Story characters. Until the fourth one existed, this was the true ending. And it deserves to be the true ending to these characters because it ended off in such a satisfying way when Andy said, "Thanks, guys." And it portrayed it perfectly. A perfect ending to this trilogy. And the fourth one had to ruin it. Don't forget how good of a villain Lotso is as well. But I've already talked about this movie long enough. Monsters, Inc. is one of my favorite movies of all time. The villains in this movie, when it comes to Randall and Mr. Waternoose, they're both really great. They both have their own motives in here. Randall just kind of wants to have his own kind of factory, and then Waternoose just wants to keep his family business alive. And we don't really get to see a lot of Waternoose, but when he's revealed to be the villain, he has that perfect amount of screen time to make him that villain that you want him to be. Like, there's little lines throughout the entire movie suggesting that he could be the villain as well. Just the last scene of the movie where he's giving his lines on how he won't let his company die.
I'll kidnap 1,000 children before I let this company die.
Kind of shows his motive and everything. You don't really need any more from Waternoose as a villain. And don't forget the wonderful characters. One of the most iconic duos, Sully and Mike, who just have that great interaction together that it pulls off some pretty good comedy as well. It's just such a classic, and I always love this movie. But there is one more on this list that I love even more. Toy Story is my favorite film of all time. Of course it's number one on this list. This movie made you connect to Woody, Buzz, these characters of Toy Story, and introduced the world. Pixar's first film, and started this thing new. It started a new era of film with this 3D animation, bringing something new to animation style. And this movie did it. Pixar introduced that. Get to see how this 3D animation grows and started with this movie, while also having a very good movie with interesting characters that made you connect to them with an amazing adventure that they go on. You really connect and fall in love with these characters like I did, which makes it number one on this list and my favorite film of all time. And with that, that was my ranking of all 28 Pixar movies. Thank you guys for watching. If you liked this video, maybe leave ones on the side that interest you too. Like and subscribe, and see you guys next time. Goodbye.